Hi everyone, and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to be showing you a new and pretty unique way to lace up a corset, but actually I shouldn't really call it a new technique because it's actually a historical technique. I first learned about this lacing technique from Nora Waugh's Corsets and Crinolines, and ever since I tried it in my black Victorian corset, I can't go back to normal lacing. Now, who is this method of lacing for and who is it not for? Okay, this method of lacing is for a relatively experienced corset wearer. So if you've already been wearing corsets for some period of time and you feel comfortable with the process of putting it on and lacing yourself up into it, then you might be ready to try this slightly more advanced lacing technique. Likewise, if you are a total beginner and you've never put on a corset before, I probably wouldn't recommend this method of lacing because it will just overly complicate the process for you, and we wouldn't want that. Now, what exactly does this different method of lacing accomplish for corset wearers? So with the bunny ears method of lacing, while it is a very convenient, very quick way to lace yourself up, its downfall is that when you're pulling on the bunny ears to tighten up the waist, it will inadvertently also tighten up the bust and hips. Now, to some degree, we do want that, but the problem sets in when you have a figure where, for instance, maybe you don't have a very curvy silhouette to begin with. Maybe you're more of a straight figure, and you want the corset to give you that hourglass figure. Well, there are two ways to accomplish that. Number one, you can tighten up your waist to get the waist smaller in relation to your hips. Or number two, if you don't want to tight lace your waist at all, you can still get an hourglass figure. And the way you accomplish that is by actually drafting and sewing a corset or buying a corset where the hips and or bust are actually a bit bigger than your real body. For me personally, all of my past few corsets that I've made, I have purposely made them with the hips about 2 inches larger than my real hips. And that's because I do not like tight lacing my waist whatsoever, but of course I still want to achieve that historical Victorian corset. And the way to do that is just by having the hips a bit looser. Some people could even choose to add padding into these hips. Personally, I don't, but that's definitely an option. But where does the problem set in with this when it comes to the bunny ears lacing method, which is the traditional method of lacing? The problem sets in where if you're trying to tighten up your waist, but the hips of the corset are bigger than your real hips, as you're tightening on those laces, it's wanting to pull into where your real body actually is, which means that as you're getting the waist to your desired tightness, the hips are going to become too tight and they're going to be smushed onto your real hips, which will create a lacing gap that is shaped like a V. It's wider open at the waist and it gets smaller at the hips. And we don't want that, and it's not going to allow you to achieve that hourglass figure that you want. So when I first learned about this method in Corsets and Crinolines, I was very excited to try it out. So the gist of this method is that instead of just using one long piece of lacing and creating these loop bunny ears at the waist that we pull on, we're actually going to be working with 3 separate pieces of lace. The first lace is going to go from the top of the corset down to just above the waist level, and then we'll have 2 tails sticking out, and you'll tighten those tails to control the tightness of the bust area. The second lace will be just over the waist area, and it will have 2 tails that you pull on to adjust the tightness of the waist area. And the third piece of lace will start from the bottom of the corset and lace its way up to just below the waist, where you'll have 2 tails that you pull on to adjust the tightness of the hips. So if that makes sense to you and it sounds like something that would be helpful to you, then let's jump into the tutorial for how to do it, and then I'll show you how to put this type of laced corset onto yourself. Okay, so here's our totally unlaced corset, and we're going to be starting with our lacing, the same amount of lacing that you would normally use for bunny ears lacing, and I'm using polyester satin ribbon. So the first step is to measure out about how much lacing we're going to need for the top lace, which is the bust lace. So I am approximating this by laying the lace diagonally over the corset in the configuration that it's going to go, just 1/2 of the lacing. And then I'm going to double that up and just trim the other end to that same length. Okay, so now that we have our bust lace trimmed to the right length, I'm going to bring that other end through the top hole to match the first side. And then just make sure both ends are the same length. And we're going to proceed to do our crisscross lacing down the corset. This is the exact same double X method of lacing that I described in my previous how to lace a corset video, so check that out if you're not familiar with it. And you can see I'm leaving quite a generous gap in the back of the corset. Okay, so I've brought the lacing down to around the area that it's going to be ending at. So if you see those two eyelets that are set closer together, those are the waist eyelets. So I'm going to be ending on the eyelets just above those waist eyelets. And I'm ending with the lacing coming from the inside of the corset to the outside. And we're just going to be leaving these two long tails, much like shoelaces. It's not going to be loops like in the bunny ears lacing method. And I'm just ending by tying that off in a bow. Okay, so let's do our waist lace now. So again, I'm going to be starting by trimming an appropriate amount. It's easier to estimate this one because the waist lace is only going to be going through these two eyelets on either side of the corset, so you don't need a very long piece. So just starting by bringing the lacing from the inside to the outside of that first hole, making sure the ends are the same length, and then doing a little X down to the second waist eyelet. And bringing that out, and again leaving two tails, which I am tying off in a bow before moving on to the hip lace. Okay, so for the hip lace, I'm just using the piece of lacing that I have remaining to me now, trimming it down a little bit because it was a little bit too long. And for this lace, we're going to be starting from the bottom of the corset and working our way up to just below the waist lace. Starting from the inside of the corset to the outside, bringing both our ends through and then pulling them so they're an equal length. And now proceeding to do our crisscross lacing the same way as we did with the bust lace, just going up instead of down. We don't want to leave any eyelets without lacing going through them, so we're just going to work our way up until we fill the remaining eyelets right up until below the waist lace. And again, just finishing by tying that off in a bow to keep it neat. So now let's talk about one of the trickiest parts of this, which is putting it on. Okay, so I'm beginning by untying those bows that I just tied and putting the corset on me, and again, it's quite loosely laced at this point, so it's easy to do up the busk. And now just making sure it's sitting at the approximately correct level on my body, height-wise. And I'm just starting by tightening up that top lace a bit, as well as lifting up the corset because it was sinking a little bit too low. And now I have identified the waist lace, again using the help of the mirror behind me. You definitely need a mirror for this kind of lacing, and pulling that waist lace. And I like to pull the waist tails upward because for me at least the corset tends to want to sink down too low at my back, so I always pull the waist laces upward, and I'm just tying that off. And keep in mind that tightening up the waist lace will be a little more, it will have more traction than in bunny ears lacing because the lacing is only going through those two holes. And now I am just tightening up the X's for the bust lacing, pulling the slack down towards those tails and tightening it up and tying it. But keep in mind that you're not going to want to tighten up these bust laces
too much because all that will accomplish is squishing your ribs, and you don't want that. Okay, so there's a lot of tails going on here, which again is why I don't recommend this to a beginner, but the results are well worth it. Now I have identified those hip lacing tails and just tightening that up a little bit and tying it off in a bow. There's a lot of bows and tails going on here, but it'll all be hidden under my clothing. And here is the finished 3-lace corset.
Okay everyone, thanks so much for watching this video. I really hope you found it helpful. If you did, leave a comment below and let me know how your own corset lacing antics go. I would love to hear from you. The accompanying blog post for this tutorial will be linked in the description with written details and photos, so definitely check that out if you're going to be trying this yourself. I also have an email newsletter that you can sign up for. All of my social media accounts are in the description as well. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more historical sewing videos. See you all soon! Bye!